Can the public school systems in America be saved, or are they beyond help? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I am your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. What's going on in the public school systems? Since coronavirus days, parents are awakening to the hazard called public schools in America, and that's a good thing, right? That is one of the good things that came out of the coronavirus shutdowns, that parents across the country, parents who previously had been relying on their oh-so-nice school teachers to educate their kids in the ways they should go in order to graduate and become a fine, upstanding member of society, productive member of society, educated member of society. Parents who had entrusted their children with these teachers were finally awakened to the idea, wow, there has been a real evil that has crept into America's public school systems. But have we reached the point that this awakening can go back to the public schools and fix them, or are they beyond help? I want to talk more about that, but before I do, a quick mention from one of Washington Times's advertisers. If you are a conservative and you are retired, Republican Metals believes you need to protect that savings now. Currency change is coming, and it's coming quickly. It's coming now. Call Republican Metals at 800-783-3118. That's 800-783-3118. And while you're doing that, you might want to check out edify.app. That is the online platform for your faith-based podcast, where I'm happy to say you may also find Bold and Blunt. You may also find Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page, click on the newsletter section, and sign up. Please sign up for my Cheryl Chumley Bold and Blunt newsletter. It contains my commentaries that I write for the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday podcasts. Podcasts, I am happy to announce, are now also available at Real Life Network. That is the faith-based news arm of Pastor Jack Hibbs's church in California. Or, you know what, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you are one of those parents out there in America who do not want to give up on America's public school system, because maybe you went to public schools and you had an excellent education in public schools. Maybe you were one of the lucky few in America who had teachers who really loved America and gave you that civics training, that civics teaching, and that pro-America historical perspective from a young age, all through middle school and all through high school. And you don't really understand all this uproar about America's public school systems, that it is indoctrinating our youth in the way of Marxists. So maybe you're one of those parents out there. And let me just speak to you for a second. Go to, and don't take my word for it, go to the Democratic Socialists of America website. That is dsausa.org. It's a nonprofit. And click on their Youth Democratic Socialists of America section. Young Democratic Socialists of America. They describe it, and I quote from the site, as the youth and student section of the Democratic Socialists of America and a national organization of recognized campus chapters and several hundred activists. We, DSA say, are students organizing in our universities, colleges, and ding, 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 red flag being raised, high schools to fight for the immediate needs of workers and students while building our capacity to fight for more radical and structural changes. Anybody who listens to Bold and Blunt regularly knows that months and even years ago, I've reported on how the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, have actively recruited teachers to go into the public school systems and teach the socialist rot that they call, rather disingenuously, democratic socialism. It's all the same. Don't be fooled, right? Progressives, democratic socialists, they're all socialists / communists, right? Because socialism is the younger, slower sister of communism. It's all about collectivism and it's all anti-American. So don't get hung up on the singular definitions because the Democrats like to do that. The Democrats like to say, we're Democrats, we're not socialists, or we're progressive Democrats. We're a little bit more left than Democrats, but we're not socialists. No, it's all one and the same. So back to my point, anybody who's been a regular listener knows that I have reported on DSA actively, strategically, purposely recruiting teachers to go into the public school systems in America and to slant the agendas in the public school system so it leans Marxist, it leans socialist, communist, Marxist. Well, this youth organization, the youth offshoot of the DSA, is now teaching students in high school how to push forward that same far left agenda. Be alarmed, be afraid, be very, very afraid, because if it's not bad enough that you have teachers actively teaching kids the socialist way, the communist way, now you have teachers working with students in those schools to spread the socialist communist way. Honestly, at this point in America, you have to wonder if you are raising a child to be a traditional thinking child, traditionalist in terms of family values, pro-America, taught and schooled in the ways of the founding fathers, taught to believe that the Constitution still has relevance today, that it matters today, that it is not simply that old, outdated document formed and forged by racist white men, racist old white men who have no value in today's modern society. If you are trying to raise your kids in the Christian conservative way to go, right? Which is what Bold and Blunt is all about, Christian conservatism, then you should be very afraid that not only has the DSA infiltrated the school system through teachers and staff, and of course the unions, right? Teachers' unions are just blatantly Marxist in agenda, but that they are also making inroads with spreading their rot through students, through student-run, student-populated organizations in the school systems. You should be afraid of that. You should be worried that your child is now going to come home from high school and sit down at the dinner table, because if you're a traditional-minded American, I know that you have family dinners still, right? So you sit down at the dinner table and discuss what happened in school that day, and you're being treated to a child who wants to scold you on capitalism or wants to chide you into turning down the thermostat because it contributes to climate change emissions, or it pollutes the earth to the point where we only have 12 years left, 10 years left, 9 years left before the earth explodes and all humanity dies. You have to be a little bit afraid that your student is going to be taught these sort of ridiculous anti-American, anti-free, anti-liberty agendas, and that they're going to bring them home to you. And then when they graduate high school, it's even worse, right? Then they go on to 4 years of college, usually outside of your home, where they live on campus, and they're surrounded by professors who teach the same sort of left-leaning rot. They play sports or participate in student activities and student organizations and student clubs with students who came out of the same public high schools now that have been infiltrated by the Democratic Socialists of America. Everywhere you look, the public school systems are being infiltrated. It used to be in this country that if such propaganda was taught in our public school system, then that would be regarded as subversion, right? And teachers would be held to account. Teachers could be fired, perhaps, or brought up on some sort of disciplinary charges or actions taken against them. And public school systems that allowed that sort of subversion in their school systems would be held to account. If not by government entities, then certainly by parents. We are at the point now in America, though, where the school systems have grown too arrogant, too powerful, too arrogant once again, and too infiltrated by far left forces that it really is time to consider the question: have the public school systems in America moved beyond the point of fixing? Is it time to simply throw up our hands in defeat and say, you know what? Public schools for my children are a no-no, a red flag, a danger zone. And parents around the nation just start yanking their kids out of public school systems. So much, in fact, that the public schools are either forced to close or forced to fire everybody and start with a clean slate. I don't know. I don't know if we're at that point, or I don't know if the schools can still be fixed. It's an interesting discussion, and I have with me a guest today who has some good insights on what's taking place in our public school system, some of which you already know, some of which you will be shocked and outraged to learn about, and also some ideas on where we should go from here. Liz Wheeler is her name, and she has just written a book that basically the title says it all. Take Your Children and Flee is kind of the message from her title. Liz, I want to thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt. It's great to have you here.
Cheryl, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I am intrigued by the title of your book, Hide Your Children, Exposing the Marxists Behind the Attack on America's Kids. Why do you call them Marxists?
This is the number one question that I've gotten so far about this book. And the reason I call them Marxists is because that's exactly who is behind the institutional capture that we're seeing. So this book actually started out as a question that I had, that I think a lot of parents across the country had during COVID, as we saw over our children's shoulders, on Zoom school, that they were being taught critical race theory and trans ideology and just your good old-fashioned moral relativism. Your truth, my truth is greater than that truth. I thought, well, this is weird that all these attacks on our children are happening all at the same time. It seemed like a concerted effort. So I started looking into why this concerted effort, this concerted attack on our children was happening. And it turns out the answer was less of why it was happening and more of who was leveraging these attacks, the people behind the capture of our institutions. I talk about our 5 foundational cultural institutions, the media, the education system, religion, the law, the nuclear family. The people behind the capture of these institutions, they're controlled by leftists now, and behind the attack on our children are quite literally Marxists. And a lot of us think of Marxists like, oh, Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. That's not untrue, but that was first-generation Marxism. The cultural Marxism of today is the Antonio Gramsci version of Marxism. Antonio Gramsci was an Italian Marxist, and he noticed, or he observed, that Karl Marx's economic Marxism really wasn't happening. There wasn't this global revolution that Karl Marx called for. So what Antonio Gramsci proposed was this idea that in order for the working class to revolt against the ruling class, the civil institutions on which the working class relied needed to be decimated first. The civil institutions that he named are the very cultural institutions that today in our country are under assault by the left.
I think there are a lot of conservatives even today seeing what is being taught kids in school because of what you rightly pointed out, the stay-at-home learning environment from COVID. But there are still a lot of conservatives, I think, in America who put the blame for this Marxist infiltration in our public school system basically on the unions, the teachers' unions. And they say the teachers are the good guys here. They shouldn't be criticized. So what do you find in your research to be true?
Well, listen, they're not wrong, but there is additional information. So the teachers' unions are some of the most powerful institutions in our country, and they are against our children. They are advocating for harm to our children. I mean, Randi Weingarten, we're familiar with her name. She's, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She endorsed a woman named Emily Drabinski for head of the American Library Association. This is now a person who's in charge of picking the books at your children's libraries, books that are pornographic in nature, that are pro-trans ideology. This president of the American Library Association is a self-avowed Marxist, and Randi Weingarten herself endorsed this Marxist to be in charge of what books are in your children's library. So you can look at it if you just trace the who behind the capture of these institutions. So our library system's been captured by Marxists. It's also a lot bigger picture than this, right? It's not just a matter of whack-a-mole, finding an individual Marxist that exists in our country now and trying to stop their efforts to subvert our children. The ideas of Marxism have been deeply embedded into our institutions. And the example that I give is the word woke. There's been a big debate among conservatives, especially the past few months, about what is the definition of the word woke? What does this word mean? And this is a great question. We should be able to answer this because we can kind of recognize it when we see it. We look at critical race theory and we're like, that's woke. We look at trans ideology and we're like, that's woke. But I trace the word woke back to where it came from, back to its origin. It is the brainchild of a Brazilian Marxist named Paulo Freire, who contended that there was no such thing as objective truth. Therefore, there was no such thing as knowledge, meaning what's taught to children in school isn't something that's true. It's just the prevailing political narrative. And he said, instead of teaching children the prevailing political narrative, we should be teaching children to view the world through critical consciousness. Now, what did he mean when he used the phrase critical consciousness? He means that he wants to train children, or he wanted to train children to view the world through a Marxist lens, where everyone is cast as either an oppressor or oppressed, this classic Marxist dialectic. This critical consciousness that Freire coined way back in the day is woke. Woke is just a euphemism for critical consciousness. It is looking at the world through this lens of Marxism. So all of these things that we as parents and as concerned citizens have become so familiar with because our children are being assaulted on all fronts are all traceable back to either individual Marxists or institutions that have been captured by Marxist ideology. And the point that I make in the book is that if we as conservatives don't acknowledge, if we refuse to acknowledge the reality of the political enemy that we face, if we back away from Marxists because it sounds hyperbolic or it sounds like an empty insult thrown on cable news, then we're not going to fight well against this enemy. We're not going to win. And I want to win, and I think conservatives and Republicans all across the country do too.
I've watched with alarm over the years, and I have no doubt that you have watched with the same level of alarm, the polls and surveys that have come out that have shown America's youth are turning more and more towards socialism as the preferred economic and social model of America and bucking against a capitalistic free market system, calling it racist and so forth. And that's stemming mostly from the public school teaching. But did you see the recent poll? It just came out a few days ago showing that 12th grade boys are turning more and more conservative. And whether you saw that poll or not, what do you make of that finding?
I did see that poll. I think it is fascinating. At the same time as we saw 12th grade boys becoming far more conservative than they were even a decade ago, we saw the reverse in 12th grade girls.
Right.
And 12th grade girls are much more liberal than they were a decade ago. And at the same time, there was a poll that came out a week or so ago that showed the vast majority of young Americans, this is Gen Z and millennials, boys and girls, are not very proud to be American. And works, that these concerted efforts that we've seen, whether it's in our colleges and universities, whether it's in elementary schools and high schools, whether it's the New York Times 1619 Project, or, critical race theory being infused into Disney and their queerness agenda, whatever it is, we see this concerted effort to reprogram young people's minds to turn them against Americanism. And we think, people aren't going to be stupid enough to fall for that. But indoctrination is very successful. In fact, one of the points that I make in my book is indoctrination itself is not a bad thing. It's actually a morally neutral concept. To indoctrinate someone is simply to instruct them in a fact or a matter, a truth. It is what is indoctrinated that determines whether indoctrination is moral or immoral. And we as conservatives and Republicans have forgotten that. We've forgotten that our public school system, for example, was formed, mandatory public education, or public education became mandatory in the 1850s in the United States because our politicians wanted to indoctrinate young Americans in American civics and in Christian Protestant values, especially because there were so many immigrants coming into the United States who weren't born in the United States, who were Catholic. And we formed this mandatory public school system for the purposes of indoctrination, but somehow between the 1850s and now, in the space of that almost 200 years, we've surrendered this institution to the left, who are using it for the same purpose but a different end. They are using it to form young people's minds. They simply have the opposite goal that we had when we formed it. They want people to be godless and anti-American. So I challenge conservatives, if we want to see a change the other way in young people's views of Americanism, of Christianity, of morality, then we have to take back these institutions and use them for what they were formed to do.
There are some out there that say the public schools are beyond fixing, that it's time just to, across the nation, parents pull their children from public school systems and homeschool, or send them to private school. Do you think we're at the point where public schools can no longer be fixed?
I'm pretty based on this. Every day that goes by, I lean more towards that viewpoint. Part of me would like to say, I think we can save our public school system. But when you look at what a mess it is, when you look at how children are graduating from high school, not proficient in math, not proficient in reading, not proficient in any academic pursuit, not proficient in independent thinking, they've spent the last 12 or 14 years surrounded only by peers. They don't know how to properly socialize with people who are outside of their own age bubble in their own classroom. They don't know anything about why America's government was formed the way that it was. They don't even like America. They've been brainwashed against Christian values. I ask myself, what purpose does the public school system serve right now? Because it's certainly not serving to properly form U.S. citizens, which would be the indoctrination of American civics and Christian values. And it's also not serving as any kind of academic or for any kind of academic success. Students are largely failing out of public schools. So by the day, I lean more towards let's get rid of the public school system because it's doing more harm than good.
I think you almost have to, logically speaking, draw that conclusion, because if you're on board with the premise of what you're saying and what your book puts forth, which I am, then what you're saying is the next generation of leaders are young Marxists, or at least Marxists in training, which means they're going to instill in the school system the same sort of Marxist principles. So you have to break that, right?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I know I'm personally biased in this area, but I'm extremely pro-homeschooling. I was homeschooled myself, K-12. Back in the day. It's been a while now. I'm 34. But I'm extremely pro-homeschooling. I'm pro-homeschooling because of parental rights, because of religious instruction, because of vastly superior academic outcomes of homeschooled students. I understand that many parents don't know if they can homeschool. I think any parent can learn to, but I understand it's an intimidating thing to try if you haven't. I understand that some parents don't feel like they can homeschool, not because of the academic instruction, but just because maybe they come from a broken family, maybe they don't have the opportunity to stay home with their children. I understand that there are situations where children can't be homeschooled, but given that it has the most superior outcome academically, sociologically, psychologically, religiously, it's something the conservative movement should be promoting as a first
Absolutely. Hide Your Children. What a great name for the book. It just speaks well. Liz Wheeler, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt, and I assume people can get this book anywhere books are offered, yes?
Yes, I can. You can go to hideyourchildrenbook.com, hideyourchildrenbook.com, or you can get it anywhere books are sold. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Hide your children. Thanks, Democrats. Thanks for bringing America to the point where we actually, as parents, have to hide our children from the tax-paid public school systems that are supposed to educate them. You need to protect your IRA and your 401k with gold right now. A quick word from Washington Times sponsors. Call Republican Metals at 800-783-3118 to get your free gold guide. That's right, free. Call 1-800-783-3118. I want to thank you for listening and ask you, if you're not a subscriber to Bold and Blunt, check it out. Go to WashingtonTimes.com, the bottom of the page, the newsletter section. Click on Cheryl Chumley, Bold and Blunt, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter containing my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. Or you may get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, including at the faith-based platform edify.app. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.